today it is a privilege for me to introduce one of the women that we're profiling, and that is Mam Zanele Mbeki. Mama, good evening.
Good evening.
It's such a pleasure to have you on, and I must say that we don't often get to see you, we don't often get to hear from you, so this is really exciting for me. Why do you keep such a low profile? Do you not like us as South Africans?
I love South Africans. But you know, there can be only one public figure in the house. We can't all be in the streets. So my husband decided to be their politician. I didn't. So he is out in the streets. I'm not. So I took a decision not to do it because it's holding on tailcoats, because I'll be out as a public figure so long as he's president. When he's not, it's gone.
When I look at how many describe you, those who've had the opportunity of interacting with you, they say you're a feminist, a businesswoman, but also somebody who's dedicated her lives to improving the lives of other women. What are your reflections on where we are as women in society today?
I think we've come very far. We've come from a racist exclusion, class exploitation, and actually patriarchal domination, both inside and outside the home. And at that particular time, you know, the black African woman was at the bottom of the pyramid, doing the most menial jobs for the least amount of pay. So what we needed is to say the struggle for us was against racism, against class oppression, and also about patriarchal domination. So we used to call it triple oppression, not just an issue of gender, because the others came first. By the time we are dealing with equality with men, we've got an unfinished business with racism. We've got an unfinished business with capitalism and its exploitation.
Where are we today when you analyze the state of women?
I'm saying most of the young people who were brought up, who were born in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, I think have had a whole lot of education, which is what we were campaigning for as well. You know, education and actually employment. I mean, when you say the education has made them the generation equality, because they can now, and I was listening to your program this week in order to hear where things are going. And the main thing, they're talking about the boardroom all the time. And I thought, but we've got unfinished business in the rural areas. There's none of you there to pass your skills from the cities in order to change the lives of poor rural women, because many of them are still where they were in 1990.
It's an important point that you're making, because it is rural women who in fact have the least access to some of the development programs that are available. Today, it is rural women who remain marginally more economically excluded from some of the activity and opportunities that perhaps have been made available to women in more urban areas. And that's a need that you identified a long time ago, that it was rural women who needed the greatest support.
South Africa, I think, was grown at the back of rural women. You know what, in the Bantustans, in the villages, you can go right now and see the dongas all over the place. There was no infrastructure, there still isn't. The infrastructure of schools, factories, and where people can work. But what the mining companies did, with the help of government, to go and recruit the men from the villages, and actually introduced a tax system that made them have to sell cows and pay tax to government before they go back, Kandambondo, they used to call it. And so the men were removed from villages for extended periods to live in the mines. And who was left in the village to tend, whether if they've got cattle, to tend the cattle, to till the soil in order for them to eat, because they were not working anywhere. I mean, missionaries built some schools, and there are many people who are products of those schools. But on the whole, there was no infrastructure, and yet, when the women bore children, these children will grow, and they're brought up without government monies. I don't know if you remember, but you wouldn't know, what the mine used to pay. We used to pay miners bachelor salaries, because they said they are not living with their families, as though there are no families to send money home to. And so at home, they will get the minimum of transfers of funds. So when you go and recruit in the rural areas, what did you invest there as a mining company? They were not investing in the community like here, where you get employed. I mean, you employ people because they were, you invested in the city in terms of their employment, in the school systems and all of that. But those would be educated by the sweat of their parents if they were educated. The mining system had invested nothing in the villages. And that's why those villages are still the way they are now. So why women in the rural areas? One thought these were the most exploited people. And they provided the labor that grew this city, these cities, and also the factories that came up about. The center of development for this country should have been the poor rural women. I mean, people are poor in the cities, but they are very close to many things. But those are so far from anything.
When you looked at the plight of rural women, was that the reason that inspired you to start the Women's Development Bank?
Because what they did, without any money, they were able to educate these guys. When they're women and men, that they, as their children, they became nurses, they became all sorts of things. There was a Women's World Banking showing how to lend to women so that they can take care of themselves. That's the first concept I got. But when I told them who I want to support when I get back home, then I said, it's rural poor women. Then they said to me, you better go and visit Grameen Bank. Grameen Bank, they've got the poorest people. And they give them something like what they call 5 taka, maybe it's like 5 shillings and everything. But they use it to build their little businesses. We sell fat cakes. For us, it would be fat cakes, whether it's firewood and all of those things. And they grow. And the idea is that when they do so, they send their children to school. And those countries have no social grant. In South Africa, we've got a safety net of a social grant, but they live on this microfinance. It was started by Professor Mohammed Yunus. As soon as I came back here, I visited there and stayed 10 days in the village to see how they do it. And they start with little amounts, but they are not doing under the National Banking Act, because is very different from banking in Standard Bank. You know, you give the money, charge interest, a small interest, but actually for your own growth, you have to fundraise. It's like an NGO. Because for me, when I started here, I started by lending 300 rand. I mean, if I've got 40 clients, taking 300 rand each, how do I pay a salary of my, my banker, my food soldier? So you need a donation of somebody who supports you to do what you are doing. But we stayed with it for about, I think in about 16 years, because it grew. And by the time we got into 2013, we were actually 75% self-sufficient, because we were trying. But what I liked is that when you go to the village, I mean, those mothers would be so happy to be able to have their own money and do their own development. And what we found out is that it's very hard to borrow 300 rand from any bank. I mean, even for us, they laughed at us when we came to open the account, because I had to put to a Standard Bank 20,000 rand that were donated to us as our capital, so that when the women borrow, they are not borrowing the bank's money. They are borrowing from our account, because they were not interested.
You also identified at that point that there were other skills that they needed, almost a support system around them in order to ensure that they would become successful. Talk to me about some of those additional needs, just on top of the 300 rand.
You know, you can't teach a poor person to survive. They know what to do. What I learned from Professor Eunice to say, don't even try doing business skills with them, because they are doing what they are doing in order to survive. And so almost most of them, I mean, they tend to do the same thing. When I went to Akonhoek, they were selling bananas, pawpaws, and other things, a few things that were grown, but not so much, because those were bought. And we didn't train them to be business people. Only later, when they were now handling higher amounts of money, we trained them on lending and how to save, and how to work in a group, because it's group lending. So those are the training skills of how you get the money and you repay, you get a higher loan, you get a higher.
When you look at where we are as a society today, do you think enough is being done to support women in rural areas, especially given how things have changed? We've had this migration of people from villages to urban areas to cities, and many villages are left without those skills. But often women are facing issues such as, access to land, to be able to even, work the land to create some kind of income for them and their families.
I'm saddened by the fact that we did not do much. And even this kind of microcredit was started, I think, for me, I knew Dr. Mohlahlana, and there were about 38 at some point of these small people lending. Now they have shrunk to about 3 remaining. And because we are not getting support in terms of government, and I don't think it comes out of malice. It comes out of not understanding poverty, and also not trusting the poor to pay. You see, what happens is that they are used to collateral in the city to say, I can't lend you money unless you've got something. For us, we deal on trust. And I mean, the same trust that we have with stokvels, it applies in the rural areas. And they actually pay. And actually, they've got a higher repayment rate than your bonds in town. So, but we did not get the law that is correct. The law that we have in South Africa is a standard banking law. And that if you want to work in the sector that I'm in, you have to, end up having to pay NCR, which came after we had started. And you have to pay them a fee to supervise you. And you have to, FICA, when the 9/11 came, and they introduced FICA to catch the people who were doing wrong. And I thought, what has that got to do with Madlamini in Akonhoek? But they applied it. So we already had opened accounts for the women. And now, when they used to go to the bank and to look for the next loan, they want them to produce their address and all these things that are done on FICA. And for us, we are working through a store or a chief. There's no address. It's just trust. We know the village, and they'll be there. And so what happened is that slowly, it comes at a cost, because when you go to the village and look for an address from the chief has got administrative costs. If you are borrowing 300 and you have to pay a chief 50 rand, what kind of a loan is that? You still have a taxi fare. So in the end, we have not had an understanding of microfinance, because in every country where it works, they have a particular law for microfinance, because it's incumbent upon the government to regulate monies in the communities. We don't have it still in South Africa.
And when you talk about microfinance, often what immediately comes to mind is our mashonisa, the people that will borrow those that are desperate money and then come and do all sorts of things if you're unable to pay it.
And that's the problem, because you get confused with that. And actually, they are so good because they actually usurp your names. So now in South Africa, the Microfinance Association is of those for-profit lenders. We are not for profit. We are for development. So we've had to change our name from a Microfinance Association of South Africa to a DMA, Development Microfinance Association. We'll keep changing, because if we are not getting the right law that puts us at the right place, but we are determined that actually it works. The poor people actually want the loans, and they've been affected very badly by the COVID-19, because we are not registered as an essential service.
So when you look at the full impact that COVID-19 has had then on your ability to continue doing what you're doing, but also just on the women that you're talking about, because the latest NIDS survey that they conducted, where they were looking at who has really suffered under COVID-19. It is the very women that you're speaking about. It is the black women who are hawkers on the street, who've got small businesses and who rely on those to stay alive.
And in the end, they end up being the ones who are standing in all these queues for food parcels, when in fact they were not. They were self-sufficient to the extent that they could. And I was looking to say, I mean, all these people who are queuing for food parcels, I mean, very few are vulnerable. You've got the standard vulnerable in terms of old age, people with disabilities and all of that. But the majority were ordinary people who can do things for themselves. Why don't we give them an opportunity? I mean, that's what actually we are dealing with. I'm hopeful that the COVID-19 has obviated what has not been done, because I think that we dropped the ball in 1994 when, in fact, we did not integrate all of those people in the growth strategy of the government. They were given grants. I knew that these grants will not last forever. I mean, the tax base of South Africa is so small. The majority of the people are not in the tax bracket. So how do you put the majority on the grant system, which is going to end at some point? Right now, most of the big companies, they are saying that they are not getting dividends and all of those things. So what will happen? I think they will dry up. We'll start borrowing in order to pay grants. I mean, I'm worried about that.
On your reflections, you say we dropped the ball.
Yes.
Who is we?
Government. Government, well, I suppose all of us in that we are government. It's our government. But we are not strong enough that on transition, I mean, for me it was obvious, but I'm not government. So it was obvious. That's why I just thought, you know, as soon as 1990, well, I started 1990, even before 1994, to say, go to Akonhoek, go and see what happens. And by that time, when come 1994, we are 3-4 years into the game, because I thought those are the people who are the target of development for the new government.
You've been close enough to government?
Yeah.
Are these ideas that you've shared before?
Oh, they all know me. Everyone. Well, I don't know the current group, but the first and second administration know me because I was haunting I still haunt now, even Khanyago at the Reserve Bank. They know me. Momiat at the Treasury. I go, because, you see, people would say you live with the president, like he can dictate to everyone. He may agree or not agree, but he's also an economist, so they've got their own limitations. But what I would say is that you don't have petticoat government to be governed from the bedroom. So he gets his mandates from the conference of the ANC. If the ANC has not decided that, then he can't do it.
So these interactions that you were having, what is it that you were asking for in particular that you thought would make the significant difference in women's lives? So this image that is still haunting them today, what were you pushing for?
I was pushing, first of all, of what I had chosen, because I knew I got to know how to do it because I learned in the field. I go to India. I've been going to India every year, and to Bangladesh, to the people who actually started microfinance to go and learn. And they even send people, it's India, Bangladesh, and Malaysia who've been assisting a lot. So I thought we will have a microfinance law because I've seen that it's supporting millions in countries where they don't have social grants. But also Africans, since then, since I started, a lady I started with in Jennifer Riria in Nairobi, she had, when I last saw her, she had 2 million clients because she got the support of government in terms of writing the correct regulation for microfinance. Recently, in Zambia, they have turned the whole post office into a microfinance bank. Tanzania started at the same time as us, and they were thriving because they've written the law, and it's on Google. You can Google it. There's not enough of us pushing the Treasury to give us the correct law regulation for this thing. And I met one of the people who wrote the SARS law, and he knows the page in the SARS law that says the minister, when they gave us the PBO status, the minister must promulgate a special law for microfinance, and he hasn't.
Do you think that's something that needs to be done, that is long overdue?
I'll always think so. I always think so. I'll always think so, because there are other very frustrated programs in the DMA who actually are worried because they keep directing us to the small business section, which actually wants you to have CPI, what do you call it, CPIC, SARS, I mean, people in the informal sector don't register for those things, and we need to assist them towards registering. They won't register just for themselves. It's like we want them ready. But people help the informal sector to grow into the formal sector.
Let's talk about your work as a feminist, as many have described you. Do you see yourself as a feminist? And what does feminism mean to you?
Now I do, because I was working with women. I think that was coming out of the fact that I've always decided to work with women. And women across the board, because I support, as I say right now, the ones who do business and those who want leadership. We created many platforms for those kinds of things. But my own practical work was that we need to dirty our hands and go to the villages. At the moment, we've got 3 programs, I think, Zanele, which is trying to do ABCD, because we are not very convinced about the social development delivery of social protection, because the people can do things for themselves. We are saying that people who are poor, is not that they are assetless. They've got certain skills within them that we can work with. They can work together with them so that to assist them to come up a bit. And then, so we are doing a Zanele where we have a contract. We are very happy that most families in indigent have got a grant, which is a safety net. Because if I was in India, you give a loan to somebody who has nothing to eat. So what they do, I'm saying in the context of South Africa, they are likely that if they borrow and start doing their own little business, they do better because they've got an assurance of money that comes in for food, so that they can invest in the business. Because when I started with 300, those people had to eat from that 300 as well. Besides, and the first time I went, it became 300 because I was saying, you know, we sit here and eat lunch for 500 rand. So why do we think people will get less? So we offered them 500 rand. And they said, we've never handled that kind of money. So please, can you reduce it? And we went down to 300. So that's how poor people are, and that's what we can manage it. Even that, for some of them, it was over-financing, because they were only selling bananas and peanuts and all of that.
When I listen to you speak, you come from a borderless world. You live in a borderless world in the sense that much of the work that you're doing is happening in different countries. You're learning from different countries.
Yes.
But I also get a sense of a solidarity around this particular issue.
Yeah.
What has it taken to build that?
I think many years of living in exile. And we had solidarity for our struggle, but solidarity for development. I mean, solidarity with countries that, the way we've got the Cubans, is solidarity. So even for development, I sent 7 of my staff members to go and learn microfinance in Malaysia. They were doing HQ work, credit management, branch management, and finance, and all of that.
And does it matter the fact that you began a lot of this work even before you became First Lady? So these doors that are open to you, they come as a result of your own hard work.
The only people I could say I got to know from the work of the presidency would have been Malaysia, in terms of, it was the ambassador more than, the presidency kind of thing. But most of the people is people that you build relationships. I mean, the rest of the world works very much through NGOs because they don't have much money on this continent. So you build relationships, and they themselves build relationships amongst themselves and also have donor relationships with the West. In South Africa, we need less of the donor relationship because there's money in this country.
I want us to talk about one of the scourges that faces women in this country today, and that is gender-based violence. And it seems to be taking place, and the president recently described it as a pandemic facing this country, and the UN, I think, has also described it as a global pandemic if the global figure is that 1 in every 3 women experience some form of violence, especially intimate partner violence. Why do you think the situation is as bad as it is? And perhaps just, again, your reflections based on the work that you've been doing with women.
I've not dealt personally directly with the people on gender violence, except calls here and there from young ladies. I keep wondering, it is increasing, but we grew up with gender violence. I mean, I was afraid of the streets in Alexandra in the afternoon because you never wanted to meet a man when it's getting darker. And even your own home, if you are a girl and you're outside, they look for you. Come 6 o'clock, you must be indoors because it was all out there. And I just think the first time I did not feel threatened. I was walking down the street in Boston when I went to study overseas. And I said, oh my God, it's the first time. I'm walking straight down in front of these men, and there's a dog next door, on the other side. Because in Alexandra, I would choose to go towards the dog and where I can pick up a stone and throw at it, because I dare not meet men. So, and so it was, I mean, there was rape all the time. We'll hear people were raped here and there.
What do you think is going to be needed in order to change the situation when it comes to gender-based violence in this country and ensure that women are better protected?
I really don't know. I really don't know. But what I think there's been all sorts of suggestions. For me, actually, way forward is that the system that we have has failed us in all directions. And this became evident in 2008 with the financial crisis. that actually, obviously, if you like, the financial system or the capitalist system cannot solve our problems. And we are still with it today. And for me, we need to re-look at what kind of ecosystem we have. And you need to protect all people. You know, when I say we were triple oppression, we moved into what we called intersectional. Because we discovered that even as we wanted our own rights as women, we had left behind people who are disabled. We had left behind, the religious persecuted. We had left behind refugees who are genuine refugees. We had left behind the transgender people. All of those people were left behind. And what is important is that for women who have known the bottom of the pyramid, they embraced all of those people. I'm not saying all of us, but it took me a long time to turn around, because in Alexandra there was a place of the transgender people who used to wear dresses, and the families used to say, don't go there, just walk on the side. But we're not treating them as human beings. They are human beings. So what I think you need a completely inclusive system. So when I say the center of development must be a poor black woman, how do you have a system that exclude all the work, all women's work? It tells me that the GDP was calculated when women's lives did not matter, when environment did not matter, when animal kingdom did not matter. So, if in fact, unless you run a farm, so on the whole is that we must re-look at those systems in order to ensure that all those sectors are taken care of.
So if not the current system, right, what are the alternatives?
I think it's an inclusive system, because, you see, I'm not saying we can't stop this life, but we should start working on it, to collaborate. I think, for me, when you say the women's movement, when it moves forward, they must begin to identify many of those who are experts. For instance, the women in economics have started defining the concept of work, and value, because these things are not currently worked properly.
What do you think some of the unfinished business, as it were, of the women's struggle are, especially for women of this generation?
They must continue doing what they are doing. I don't think they are doing anything wrong. And I think it's correct to claim your space in a democracy. They must continue to occupy all those spaces and begin the changes. The fact that you've become a board member of Standard Bank, what does it say to Mrs. Lamini in Akonhoek? So I'm saying that let's fight battles that will also resonate with others, and especially those left behind. For me, the question that the young ladies must think about, who is going to make the change for the rural poor? And today, there's high-tech agriculture. They can learn it. There's 4IR, they know it. And 4IR and all of those things are for solving the problems of the poor. How do they introduce? Now we can't go back with a home, because you still, it's very hard. But can they help to change the conditions of poor people, and which means you see them a bit more, even as extension workers or anything in the rural areas. Let's see them all over the place. So, I mean, we can't get professionals in the rural areas. I mean, in my program, we started what we call is a training program. Because when you want to recruit, you've got to recruit people from the city. And when they get there, they can't get a gym, they can't get what they want. Then before you know it, they're gone. So to say, how do we recruit in the rural areas to create professional, because even yourselves who are not born in Soweto, who come to the city, you were born in the rural areas. So you can still fit in. I mean, if you were trainable, why are they not trainable?
One of the things that steals from the development of our communities, especially in rural areas, is service delivery doesn't seem to be reaching them. And corruption has played a significant role in the extent to which the state is able to function. What are your thoughts on the levels of corruption that we're seeing right now?
It's soul destroying. I mean, people are not stealing 50,000 rand or 15, even at the highest 50 million. I can't understand what people do with 200 million, with the kinds of money that, and if in fact they are proven to have been done, but if in fact they have been lost, what value have they put into communities with that money? I mean, it's soul destroying because I think there should be a certain level when you are satisfied to say, this is enough. I can't deal with it. No, to say, how do we then push continue to push ethical leadership for those that you are working with? Because I cannot understand. I mean, public service that actually is self-service. I have no answers because I don't. You see, our state became much, I suppose, I think weak in the sense that there is no arrests. There are no people found guilty, but money is gone. I join those who are saying, I mean, people in some countries, but you know, have to go and wear the orange uniform. I think that's a frightening thing for anybody, so people will avoid to want to get there. But we have not done it. And I don't know, I wouldn't know who to go and pick up because I really don't know exactly who is guilty.
Who are the women that inspire you?
When I got into like this public service space, and then people kept saying, First Lady, what? I said, what is that? And then I thought, you know, I really admire Mrs. Kaunda in Zambia because she left politics to elected women politicians. She left all these spaces that are sometimes are said to be first ladies because she's not elected, she's not an official of government. So why take all of those positions? What she did was to take care of the Kaunda family. She had quite a big one. And left public issues to the elected public women in terms of the women's leagues and everything. So she has no competition with them because they keep trying to bring you into those areas like, you know, why should I get there? Because there are people who are assigned to those positions. So, yeah. Otherwise, there's a myriad. I mean, lots of young girls I admire. I can't be them, but I see what they are able to do at a very early age, which I couldn't do. So, yeah, it's a question that's difficult to answer because there's role models all over the place that you pick up on.
So, have you ever been approached to, run or compete for office politically? Is it something that was ever brought to you? You don't seem to like the idea much.
No, it happened in 1994 because people were asked to put names for parliament. And I think I got in above people who were very senior in terms of, and my assumption was that it's not about me, it's about the name. Because people were choosing all these names that are associated with the ANC. And I was to be a parliamentarian over people who were in the NEC because they didn't know their names on this thing. So I said, but I had no intention ever. I've never had.
What do you do for fun?
Right now, well, under lockdown, I mean, this house is music. I like, I'm not a great reader because do I read magazine? I mean, there are books I'm supposed to read I have not read. And I've just recently joined in meditation. I love exercise. I like sport. Played a lot of sports. And I like watching it, but I'm always a player.
So you've spoken about the fact that it's lockdown, and this is probably an interview that the next time we get this opportunity to speak to you will probably be when, Mbeki? It's probably going to be a long time, or it's not going to happen again. You see, and precisely because of that, what are you going to be getting up to? What is filling your days?
Just far too much. We are busy working on the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library, on the Thabo Mbeki School at UNISA, and at my own programs. And all of those are so inspiring when I see what has happened to them. And is that they'd make a difference if we get them to where they should be in terms of the training of the youth, and also preserving what so many people have done in terms of the library and museum. So those are projects new for our old age. You start projects now when you should be closing down. And there is no book between us. He hasn't got a book, I don't have a book.
That's a crime shame. There should be a book somewhere in there.
When?
We can make the time. I'm curious to know, at this point, how much of what you're doing is about the legacy that you leave behind and potentially that which your husband will also leave behind?
You know, I always think of the Excalibur, King Arthur, to say we've lived our lives, and that which you have done, let him make pure. I mean, if anything remains to be remembered, those who want to, they will. But I'm not in a state of creating a legacy. Because I've lived my life. I can't go back and recraft it towards a legacy. I mean, I lived it as I experienced it. And the choices were opportunities that I got. I wasn't making choices towards something. I mean, people talk about ambition, that I wish to be this. All I had wanted to be is to be a dentist, but I couldn't go to the state at the time. I mean, that's when I was at school. But I've done anything that I could with what I had and had opportunities for. And there was no basic plan.
Mbeki, let me thank you so much for having graced us with your presence today and giving us an opportunity just to talk to you, some of the work that you've done in your life, and also what that means for the women of South Africa. And certainly many of those, like I said at the beginning of the interview, who know you, speak very highly of you. And I didn't realize that you have such a sense of humor. It's been a pleasure being in conversation with you, Mam Zanele Mbeki.